Welcome to On the Money Line, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm Newsome, and I'm here to break down UFC Vegas 94, which means we are back in the Apex, which actually feels like quite a while since we've been in the Apex, which is nice. Obviously nice to be away from the Apex, not too nice to be back. Although, like I've said before, I don't mind the odd event at the Apex. It provides a bit of a different type of event than what other events are. You know, you can hear the strikes a little bit louder, you can hear the coaches, the corners, which again, you know, if it's once a month, I'm cool with that. And yeah, we're back at the Apex for UFC Vegas 94, headlined by Amanda Lemos versus Virna Jandiroba. This podcast, or this episode of the podcast, is going to be a little bit shorter and sweeter, more quick fire picks with, you know, a little bit of reasoning. I'm a little bit under the weather, so I'm just trying to soldier through as well as I possibly can, but rather than it being like 45, 50 minutes long, which, to be honest with you, I've said that before, and they've still been 45 to 50 minutes long, but I am going to try and fire through this card as quick as possible, because like I said, I don't feel too great. But before we get into the breakdowns, as always, if you're going to want to jump into the action for this event, then you can do so at MMAplay365.com. We've got something for every type of gambler, whether you're a fun gambler, you want the long shot parlays, you want to build your own parlays, or you want, you know, us to build the parlays for you, then we've got that. We've got written breakdowns for the long-term gamblers. If you just want to bet on exactly what I'm betting on, where my money is, then we've got the official bets as well. And of course, we've got Bayes AI from our UFC prediction software, which gives you a percentage prediction for every possible outcome of every fight on every UFC card, and all that content is within one subscription. We don't separate it between the AI and the handicapper. Everything's together. Just choose next event monthly, or take advantage of our annual, which is $99 for the entire year. And that's all at MMAplay365.com. And with the introduction out the way, with the promo out the way, let's get to the breakdowns. And as always, we start in the main event. We've got Amanda Lemos versus Virna Jandiroba. It's a real interesting fight from a stylistic perspective. Amanda Lemos has dealt with a grappling expert in a last fight in Mackenzie Dern. Mackenzie Dern, you know, it's in my opinion, but I think it's pretty factual. You know, she is a better BJJ grappler than Virna Jandiroba. Even though Virna Jandiroba is a really good world-class grappler herself, Mackenzie Dern is better. And although Lemos had some issues on her back against Mackenzie Dern, which, to be honest with you, I feel like any fighter in the world would have issues on the back against Mackenzie Dern, Amanda Lemos did actually do pretty decent in regards to staying safe. The one thing I really spotted and that I liked is she wasn't like showing her back or giving up her back to try and stand back up to her feet, which would have been a nightmare against somebody like Mackenzie Dern. So it shows an intelligence within the grappling. And Amanda Lemos actually wasn't scared getting on top of Dern either, and, you know, getting in a guard and striking when she'd hurt her. So there's a level of grappling from Lemos. Is she going to be the better grappler in this fight? No. Jandiroba's going to be, but Lemos has got a good grappling game, good enough to remain safe, good enough to, in my opinion, not to get submitted. Of course, fighters can always make mistakes, but Amanda Lemos, the real gap in skill in this fight, in my opinion, is within the striking. She's an absolute savage striker. What she did to Mackenzie Dern was brutal. You know, the leg kicks, the switching stances, the hard combinations. She's strong and deceptively physical as well. So I think from Jandiroba's perspective, Jandiroba is going to try and get the fight down to the mat, and I do think she'll get a couple of takedowns throughout this fight, but I don't think there's going to be enough there to beat Lemos. I also like the 5 rounds for Lemos as well, and the reason why is a fighter with the style of Jandiroba, in regards to the grappling game, you know, a 3-round fight can really quickly pass you by and, you know, low-key just start pulling the fight away from the opponent. But over 5 rounds, I don't think Jandiroba is going to be able to just rinse and repeat takedowns and stay on top of Lemos for 5 rounds without Lemos being on the feet and striking hard. And again, if Jandiroba is closing the distance to get a hold of Lemos, and Lemos is landing hard combinations, then again, it could make Jandiroba hesitant. So I really like the power of Lemos, the physicality of Lemos, and the fact that she is an absolute savage from a striking perspective, but also she's got a grappling game to help her in the grappling moments where Jandiroba is going to be at her best as well. So for those reasons, I'm picking Amanda Lemos to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Tavares versus Jung Park. Now, I'll be honest, I've never really been a massive Yeong Park truther, shall we say. Like, he's a good fighter, obviously UFC caliber, that's proven at this point, but I've never been a huge fan of him in regards to believing that he's this super quality fighter that's going to be able to get into like the top 15, which is obviously in and around where Brad Tavares has been. Now, obviously what's going against Brad Tavares here is the fact that he is aging, plenty of miles on the clock. So Yeong Park, I think, is going to be at sort of, like I say, an age advantage and, less mileage on the clock advantage, if that makes sense. But Brad Tavares, I still think that there's something about Tavares. As long as he's not fighting these young, hungry killers that have got knockout power, I do think that he's still got something to give. And Yeong Park is a fighter that's going to accumulate volume on the feet, that, he's going to do a nice job in regards to the striking. And because of that, I think that it's going to be very, very competitive with Tavares, because Tavares is still a good striker with good volume, mixes things up quite well. And where Yeong Park can really pull away from his opponents is within the wrestling and grappling. He's got a decent MMA wrestling and grappling game. But Brad Tavares is almost impossible to take down, and if you do get him down, it's very difficult keeping him down for long periods. So I don't think that Yeong Park's going to have too much success with the wrestling and grappling. Because of that, I think it's a fight that's going to be won and lost on the feet. And in all honesty, I don't see a knockout on either side. I think it's going to be a fight that is going to be contested over 3 rounds. And if it's won and lost on the feet, I think the volume's going to be similar. I think the damage is going to be similar. I just think there's a lot of similarities in the way that these two fight from a striking perspective. And because of that, it's just going to be a super close fight. So in these super close fights, from a pick and prediction perspective, I'm more often than not going to side with the underdog. So for those reasons, I'm picking Brad Tavares to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is a fight that I'm not actually 100% sure if it's going to happen, but I'm going to break it down anyway. We've got Damon Jackson versus Chepe Mariscal. Now, the reason why I'm not sure it's going to go down is, look, Big Marcel reported the fight announcement on X, which apparently was from Damon Jackson, which is great. And, a bookie has odds as well, but that's the thing. Only one bookie's got the odds. It's not yet on Topology. It's not yet on UFC stats. So yeah, I don't really know what's happening with it, whether, these sort of sources are taking a while to update. But yeah, like I say, I'm not sure the fight's going to happen, but there is odds out for it at the minute. And at the time of recording, Damon Jackson is a plus 190 underdog, which, to be honest with you, at these sort of lines, and Jackson as an underdog is almost an auto bet for me. Like, I've always had decent success betting Damon Jackson fights, especially when he's the underdog. So I got him at dog odds against Camuela Kirk. I know he closed the favourite, but he was an underdog for, easily a few days before the line flipped. And I got, Jackson as an underdog against Camuela Kirk. I also bet Damon Jackson as an underdog against Pat Sabatini. I also bet Damon Jackson as an underdog against Alexander Hernandez last time out. Of course, he's won all those fights that I've just mentioned. I did also bet him as an underdog against Dan Ige and Billy Quarantillo as well. And look, Dan Ige absolutely beat the brakes off him. You can't win them all. But Billy Quarantillo, it was a very close fight. And, Damon Jackson, there was one momentum shift in that 3rd round, one mistake, and that's what led to Damon Jackson end up losing that decision. But he was winning the fight into that 3rd round until that momentum shift. So even that was razor close. I also bet Damon Jackson against Charles Rosa as a favourite as well. And then the other fight that I didn't bet that Damon Jackson did a really good job as an underdog was against Mirsad Bektic. So, from Jackson being an underdog perspective, he's always live. He's got that dog in him. He's striking super unorthodox, nothing technical, but it's pressure. It's in your face. He's got deceptive power as well. He's fast, but then he's got a wrestling background, and then he's grappling some of the trickiest in the entire division. He's just an absolute nightmare to deal with. And look, Chepe Mariscal is tough. He's also got that dog in him, and he's going to be the better striker here. But I think if Damon Jackson can mix in the wrestling and get on top of Chepe Mariscal, which Chepe Mariscal has been taken down. He's not susceptible to being taken down. He can be got at. And I think if Jackson can just stay out the way of anything powerful coming from Mariscal and be mixing in these takedowns and getting some of that top control time, also gives him a little bit of a finishing upside as well. I think Jackson can do a really good job as an underdog once again. And look, every man and his dog was picking against Damon Jackson, against Alexander Hernandez. They were against Pat Sabatini. They were against Camuela Kirk. And, of course, the other fights that he's lost as an underdog as well. But Jackson will always fight for your money. And he always produces these performances that I just don't think he gets enough credit from the public, from the fans, of how good and how tricky he is to actually fight and deal with. So, yeah, once again, Damon Jackson, an underdog. I love the dog in him. I love the style of fighting that he brings. Super energetic. He's dangerous. And like I said, he's got the job done for me plenty of times before as an underdog. So I'm going back to the well. I'm picking Damon Jackson to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Steve Garcia versus Seung Choi. This is low-key probably one of the most entertaining fights on the entire card. I don't think either of them are very high level from a UFC perspective, but man, this fight's going to be fireworks. Both fighters, are in your face. Both fighters love to throw heat. Both fighters will eat shots to give shots. They're both just really, really good, entertaining fighters to watch. They've also both been hurt a ton of times. They can both recover and then come back and win. So it's one of these fights where I think, we could see both fighters getting dropped. We could see a ton of damage, a ton of action, and it's which fighter is going to end up being more durable, which fighter does recover better than the opponent. And although I think that Seung Choi is the better fighter in this fight, I just think Steve Garcia's dog in him is much bigger. I think that, yes, Garcia is probably going to get hurt at some point in this fight, but we've seen him hurt on multiple occasions and come back and not only win, but finish on multiple occasions as well. Like I say, it's not going to be pretty from both fighters from a technical perspective. It's going to be very pretty from an entertainment perspective. But like I say, I just like the toughness, the grit, the heart, the recoverability of Steve Garcia. And like I said, he's got that hammer in him as well, which, can end his opponent's night. So it's going to be a super entertaining fight, back and forth, punches thrown everywhere, fighters being dropped. I think is going to finish in this fight, though. If not, then they're going to both go to a decision with the faces absolutely mashed up. But I am going to be siding with Garcia. I'm picking Steve Garcia to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Holobaugh versus Kaynan Kruschewsky. I've already seen that, I think there's going to be a lot of mixture of opinions on this fight. For me, I don't like the fact that Holobaugh is 37 years old. I don't like the fact that I just feel that he's still in that old era of MMA. He guard plays quite a lot as well, which again is something that I don't like to see. He does have a decent guard, but it's all really opportunistic stuff. Like even on The Ultimate Fighter, the McGregor season, the fight that he won in that tough house, he was getting controlled on the mat. He was playing guard and eventually caught a submission, and it was great in the end for him. But at some point in the UFC, just guard playing and trying to catch opponents with submissions off your back, at some point it's just going to come to a bit of a standstill because there's levels in the UFC. And like I say, that's one side of his game I don't like. What I do like with Holobaugh, again, I've said this multiple times with multiple fighters already on this podcast, he's got that dog in him. He is tough, he's grindy, he comes forward, he's in your face, he's got low-key power in his hands as well, and that power is something that Kruschewsky's really got to watch out for. But outside of getting caught with a big punch or Kruschewsky just being sloppy and getting caught with an armbar or a triangle off Holobaugh's back, I think Kruschewsky's the better fighter. I think his striking's better, he's younger, I think he's going to be faster. Like I say, he's got an extensive Muay Thai background as well, but he's also got decent reactive takedowns and can get on top of his opponents. And this is something else I don't like with Holobaugh in regards to his takedown defense. You're able to take him down, and often as well, if you want to keep going to it. And Kruschewsky's got decent takedowns. He's got a decent topside grappling game. Again, decent enough, in my opinion, to stay safe from, the guard playing of Holobaugh and the submissions that he's going to throw up. But then the other side to Holobaugh is, look, he's had 7 fights in the UFC and he's won once. And yeah, he's fought a couple of decent fighters along the way there as well. But I just feel that there's not a lot of upside on Holobaugh here. I also, and this is a good point, I also like the fact that Kruschewsky has gone back to Brazil and he's training with the Fighting Nerds, which are actually on an absolute fucking roll at the minute. Guys like Gian Silva, Caio Bahayo, and all the other guys that are coming out this Fighting Nerds gym. The gym's growing with super talent week by week, month by month. And I think that Kruschewsky's made a real good and wise decision to go to the Fighting Nerds and do a camp there for Kurt Holobaugh. So yeah, there's a lot that I'm liking from Kruschewsky's side. There's a lot that I'm really not sure about from Holobaugh's side. For those reasons, I'm picking Kaynan Kruschewsky to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is the best fight on the entire card, in my opinion. We've got Cody Durden versus Bruno Bulldog Silva. We've not seen Bruno Silva for quite a while, but man, he was on a real good roll before. He's had a little bit of a break, training with Henry Cejudo, and just even at the later stages of his career, and I'm not saying that he's over the hill or declined or anything, but even in the later stages of his career, he made some real good developments and he was knocking everybody out. And of course, he already had this really good grappling game, and he wasn't so bad from a wrestling perspective as well. Look at the Tagir Ulanbekov fight. So Bruno Silva was and is a fighter that's like super exciting, really well-rounded, and I've been really back and forth in this fight because Cody Durden's also a very good striker, and he's also got a really good grappling game, and he's got a no-quit attitude about him as well. We've seen him in some real rough submissions, and he's gritted it out and fought through it and then won the fight as well. The Jake Hadley fight comes to mind with that. But he's got that relentless wrestling style, and I think that that's what's edging me towards him in this fight. My only concern that I've got for Durden within that relentless wrestling approach is, does he leave a neck in there that Bruno Silva just wraps up and guillotines him? I think when it comes to the wrestling and the scrambles, Durden's the better wrestler, and Bruno Silva, in my opinion, is the better grappler. But within the scrambles, I think that Durden's good enough. He's good enough to avoid Bruno Silva getting on top of him during a scramble and potentially even being able to re-wrestle Silva, get mat returns as well. So that's what's leading me towards Durden. From a striking perspective, I think it's going to be even. I think Cody Durden's probably the better technical striker. I think Bruno Silva might have that more one-punch knockout power. So the striking dynamic's going to be interesting, but I kind of feel this is going to be a fight that's going to be dependent and won and lost within the wrestling and grappling. And like I say, because Durden, in my opinion, is the better wrestler and he's relentless with it as well, as long as he keeps his head out of, a sloppy guillotine attempt from Bruno Silva, I just think that he's going to be able to grind away at this fight and potentially frustrate Silva down the stretch. So yeah, it's a real close fight, a really good fight. Like I say, in my opinion, the best fight on the entire card. One I've been back and forth on, but I'm going to side with Cody Durden here. Like I say, I think the wrestling upside is what's going to take him through this fight. For those reasons, I'm picking Cody Durden to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got duo Choi versus Bill Algeo. And it's a really tough fight to predict this because I still think there's a good fighter in duo Choi. I genuinely believe that. The issue is he hasn't won a fight since 2016 in the UFC, which is 8 years ago. So it's a very, very long time. Now, you have got to take into consideration that he hasn't been fighting for all those 8 years. Obviously, he took the time out for the mandatory military service that, all male Koreans have to do. So he did take a few years out for that, but even since he's come back, he's lost a couple of fights. He drew last time out against Kyle Nelson in a fight that he probably should be winning. But on the flip side to that, Bill Algeo is a fighter that I've always enjoyed watching. But last time out, he really dropped the ball against Kyle Nelson. And yeah, look, it's going to be another one of these fights. It's going to be another close fight, I think, in my opinion. You've got Bill Algeo, who I think starts a little bit slower. Duo Choi starts really fast. So I expect the first round to be a Duo Choi round, and if he doesn't knock Algeo out, which Algeo is tough, he's durable and he's got good recoverability as well, I think if Algeo doesn't get knocked out in that first round and it does go deep into round 2 and 3 and maybe to a decision, I think Algeo is probably going to win that third round. Algeo seems to get stronger the longer the fights go on, and then that second round, I think the first half of it is probably going to be Choi, the second half is going to be Algeo. And again, it's a bit of a cliche because a lot of fights are matched up like this, in my opinion, and it's always easy to say, oh yeah, well, fighter A is going to win round 1 and the first half of round 2, and fighter B is going to win the second half of round 2 and round 3, therefore it's going to be close. But I genuinely think that if the fight does end up like that, then yeah, he's got a really good chance of ending up like that and being a really good chance of being one of these really close split decision types of fights that can go either way. But from a finishing perspective, I do think that Choi's got a window of opportunity in that first round to knock Algeo out with power, the speed and the explosive combinations that Choi will fire at Algeo. So with the slight finishing upside on Choi for that round 1, and if he doesn't get it, it being close anyway for the remainder of the fight and maybe a split decision, and then the fact that Choi's the underdog, yeah, I'm just gonna, from a pick and prediction perspective, I am gonna side with the Korean. I'm picking Doo-ho Choi to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Hyder Amil versus Jung Lee. And again, I think this is another one of these fights that I don't really have a massively strong lean, if I'm being honest. Like, Hyder Amil's been in some really exciting fights, like his Contender Series fight against Emre Sonmez was super crazy, back and forth, wrestling, cardio. Like, a lot can be said to Hyder Amil, and of course Emre Sonmez with that fight in regards to the grit, the toughness, and the cardio. Jung Lee on the other side, he's shown elements of his game that is really sharp with his striking and power. And yeah, I just think it's going to be another one of these back and forth fights where Jung Lee's probably going to want to keep the fight standing, but then Hyder Amil's not got bad power himself, but then Amil's got okay wrestling and more likely the one to go to the wrestling. And again, when it's coming to making a pick and a prediction, I feel that the fighter that can just break things up a little bit more in regards to a striking flow, especially with Jung Lee being a fluid striker, the fighter that can break things up a little bit more, slow the fight down, take the striker away just for a minute or two away from the striking, and then they've got to reset back on the striking, breaking the flow, pulling away, just giving the judges something slightly different to look at, is the fighter that I'm more often than not going to side with in a fight that I do believe is going to be super close and super competitive. So for those reasons, I'm picking Hyder Amil to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Brian Kelleher versus Cody Gibson. And I think this is going to be a real, again, close, competitive, tough, gritty fight. I'm actually quite surprised that Cody Gibson's out, or at least the last time I saw the line, he was out at like minus 225, minus 250. And look, to an extent, I get the Cody Gibson side completely. You know, Brian Kelleher hasn't looked super outstanding in quite a while, and he's got a lot of miles on the clock, and he's been in the wars previously in his UFC career. And Cody Gibson has got this second life in the UFC now, this second chance in the UFC. And again, he's game, he's in your face, he's gritty and tough again, just like Kelleher. Both fighters are super well-rounded, so it is going to come down to which fighter is able to push through that grit and the grind a little bit more. Maybe which fighter's, has got less miles on the clock and is that slightly more durable, which again is the Cody Gibson side, but I don't agree with the betting line. I don't think it should be out at minus 250. I do think Cody Gibson is going to get the job done, but like I said, I think it's going to be really close and really competitive. Kelleher is always going to be, at the very least, game and competitive at this level in the UFC. Of course, if he was fighting somebody top 15, top 20, then it'd be a completely different conversation, but I don't think that Cody Gibson is up at top 15, top 20. Well, he's obviously not at top 15, but I don't think he's close to around being a ranked fighter. So I think it's another well-matched fight between two fighters that are in and around each other within the rankings. And yeah, I am going to side with Cody Gibson. Just like I say, I don't like the miles on the clock and the fact that Kelleher has been in a ton of wars over the year, and I do think that catches up with you the longer your career goes on. But like I say, I really don't agree with the betting line. I think it should be much shorter. But from a pick and prediction perspective, I'm going to be picking Cody Gibson to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Miranda Maverick versus Dione Barbosa. So Dione Barbosa is a really interesting prospect, in my opinion, in the UFC. Like, there's a really good fighter in there, good qualities, and I do think at some point she's going to put it all together and go on a bit of a win streak and maybe start to become like a real tough and dangerous fighter and a bit of a nightmare to deal with. But right now against Miranda Maverick, I don't think Barbosa has got it all together just yet. And even if she did, I think Miranda Maverick's experience and the fact that she's been in there, she's done that in the UFC in regards to, fighting good quality opponents, and she's took a couple of losses along the way, and those losses, you're always able to learn from them and come back better. I like where she's training with the likes of Rose Namajunas as well, and with her wrestling and grappling game, I just think it shuts Barbosa down a little bit. Like, Barbosa doesn't mind getting on her back, and to be fair to her, she's really tricky in regards to trying to lock up a leg really quickly or throw up a submission. But again, like I mentioned with Holobaugh earlier, she plays guard a little bit too much. And again, against a certain level of opponent, I think that works. Like being able to, lock up a leg to at the very least sweep your opponent, reverse position and get back on top. But Miranda Maverick, I think, is much better than that. I think Maverick gets on top of Barbosa. Early Barbosa will try these submissions whilst they're dry, and maybe a couple of them look like they get a little bit close, but I don't expect Miranda Maverick to get submitted by these. I think that she'll ride through any dangerous submission attempts early, and the longer the fight goes on, the more success she'll have, the more tired Barbosa's going to get, and then Maverick's striking comes into play as well, where she's not going to be so much worried about Barbosa shooting on her, because if Barbosa's tired, we saw the lazy shots in Barbosa's UFC debut. Yeah, I think right now for this specific fight, it's a real tough fight for Barbosa. But I do believe that she's one to keep an eye on moving forwards, because like I say, I think that she's going to put it all together at some point, and then she's going to be a real tough out for a lot of these women. But for right now, I'm picking Miranda Maverick to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Loik Radzhabov versus Trey Ogden. Now, this fight reminds me a little bit of the Andrei Petroski and Josh Fremd fight from last weekend. I cashed Andrei Petroski at plus 100. He closed a pick'em. And the reason why it reminds me of that is because everything outside of a skill set perspective told you that Fremd should do really well against someone like Petroski, fighting at altitude, being able to have the cardio advantage, putting pressure on, maybe getting taken down initially, but then defending takedowns and really causing Petroski to tire out to the point where he can't really continue effectively, and he then goes on to lose the fight. And it's similar with Radzhabov, because Radzhabov doesn't have the best cardio. He does leave it all out there in round one and slows down significantly. And then it comes to just big power shots. And again, it starts looking a little bit rugged and less slick. And Trey Ogden is that type of fighter that can wear you out, tire you out, and then just start getting these trip takedowns and getting on top of you and smothering his opponents on top. Like, he's got a decent wrestling game, and his grappling game, he can be a bit of a blanket. But the thing is, like, Radzhabov is a good wrestler, and I just don't think Ogden's wrestling is going to work in this fight. And then when Ogden's having to be forced backwards with the big power punches of Radzhabov, I think Radzhabov's got a good chance of catching him again. So again, just going back to the Petroski and Fremd fight, like I say, everything here is telling you that Ogden's just got to weather that storm in round one, and then takedown should come, and then you should be able to get on top of Radzhabov. But even when Radzhabov's tired, his wrestling's really, really good. And I'm just not sure Ogden's going to be able to get Radzhabov down, even if he's tired. And I think Radzhabov's going to be really dangerous on the feet against Trey Ogden, who can be hit as well. So again, when I looked into this initially, I was like, okay, this could be a decent dog opportunity for Trey Ogden. But the more I look at it, the more I just think, look, I think the physicality and the actual skill set of Radzhabov is going to outweigh Ogden's ability to weather a storm and then should be able to grind later down the fight. I just don't think it's going to go down like that. So yeah, for me, I'm picking the more physical, powerful and skilled fighter in Radzhabov. I'm picking Loik Radzhabov to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Luana Carolina versus Lucia Pudilova. And I think this is one of these fights where I want to be confident in Pudilova, but the amount of fights that she's just gone so close in, like even fights where I think that she's got a massive stylistic advantage, she's got an experience advantage, she's been in there with better opponents, she just has this knack of making every single fight close, whether she's fighting up in competition, which is great, or whether she's fighting down a bit further down in competition, which is obviously not great. All these fights just seem to be super close. And on the flip side, Luana Carolina is one of these fighters where, you do fade her from time to time because she doesn't look like she's one of these real solid sort of prospects or fighters in the UFC around this level, but then she surprises you with certain performances and comes out looking way better than what you would. Sorry, I just had to clear my throat then. But yeah, coming out way better than what you assumed and what you analysed. And again, I just think it's got all the makings to be another one of these super close fights that goes to a decision, and it's going to be a split decision. And, everyone who's on the opposite side of that split decision is going to cry robbery, and the people on the other side are going to be, no, that was a good decision. I just feel like it's going to be one of those fights. And to be honest, I think it's lined relatively close as well, Pudilova being the slight favourite, which I do agree with, because I do think Pudilova's the better fighter. I do, again, think that she's fought the better level of competition. All these things that I think Pudilova's in every single fight, and it always ends up being super close. But from a pick and prediction perspective, I'm siding with Lucy Pudilova to win this fight. And the final fight to break down, we've got Muhammad Usman versus Thomas Peterson. Now, in general, I actually like Muhammad Usman. He cashed big for me in his UFC debut, where he knocked out Zach Pauger. I think I got Usman at like plus 250 or plus 275 or something along those lines in that fight. And then he did a good job against Junior Taffer. Then he did a good job against Jake Collier. Then I bet him again as an underdog against Mick Parkin. I actually thought that he won that fight against Parkin. I just think that maybe that one low kick that stumbled Usman in that third round against Parkin might have been the one to sway the judges. But I actually like Muhammad Usman. I don't think he's a fighter that he's going to hit the top 5, the top 10, maybe the top 15, but I do think he's a solid fighter in and around this level in the UFC. And Thomas Peterson, on the other hand, quite small for a heavyweight in my opinion. But look, Muhammad Usman isn't the heaviest heavyweight. He looks big, but he doesn't weigh in at 265 pounds. Peterson's got a bit of a wrestling background, but from what I've seen, it's okay, it's serviceable, but I just don't think it's anything to shout about. Like, it's not a Curtis Blades heavyweight type of wrestling, for example. So I think that Peterson's going to come in this fight. I think from a striking perspective, Usman's going to be the slightly better technical striker, maybe land a little bit more volume. But Peterson's striking is a means to the wrestling, and Muhammad Usman's got a wrestling background. He is tough to take down. If you do take him down, he can get back up to his feet. I just don't think Thomas Peterson can take him down consistently for 3 rounds. I think he gets 1 or 2 takedowns along the way, but I think Usman eventually starts being able to defend the takedowns, get up to the point where the takedown Peterson's just hit, he hasn't really scored for, and then Usman starts landing some good strikes on Peterson. I'm just not that sold on Thomas Peterson yet. Look, if Peterson comes into this fight and, relentlessly wrestles and blast double legs Usman all over the cage and looks great, then, fair enough, maybe Peterson is better than what I'm giving him credit for. But until I see it, I'm not too sure. And what I've seen of Usman is, again, a very well-rounded fighter that just has a grit and a will to win and just does enough in regards to what he needs to do to win his fight. So for those reasons, I'm picking Muhammad Usman to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of the podcast. I wasn't sure whether I was actually going to do this podcast or go through with it, but yeah, like I say, I'm not feeling too good, and because of that, you've got a slightly shortened down version. But like I said, something's better than nothing. I hope you all enjoy it. I hope it all gives you some analysis to, get your teeth into for when you're looking into these fights as well. I always appreciate everybody tuning in. I always appreciate everybody dropping a comment on YouTube, as it really helps the algorithm. Please also subscribe to our YouTube channel. Again, that all helps us as well. And one last time, if you are wanting to jump into the action this weekend, then make sure you do so at MMAplay365.com, where we've got everything for every type of gambler, all inside of one subscription package. We don't separate the subscriptions. The subscriptions aren't even that expensive either. $5 for one event, $10 a month, or $99 for a full 12 months, 1 year. So yeah, make sure you check that out at MMAplay365.com. I'm Newsome. Thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you again next week.